Emotionally unavailable people often have hesitation in trusting others due to things that have happened to them in the past. This can include someone who has developed a less emotion filled personality. That was my wife, growing up in a broken home with a lot of craziness and addictions, alcoholism in particular. And by eighth grade, she was a parentified child. So she had to learn to shut her emotions off to survive. Early in our marriage, she'd always say, I'm a survivor. I'll survive. The only problem with that is survivors don't relate to intimacy because they're too busy surviving. She was one of those who wasn't emotionally available. You see, I always used to jokingly say, but in a minute too, if there was someone hurting, I'd be down there hurting with them. She would say, hey, you're emotionally bleeding on the carpet, clean it up. It was kind of like that. But that comes from her childhood. It's her past. All right. So let me go back here. This can include someone who has developed a less emotion-filled personality as a result of having a lonely childhood or having experienced emotional damage. All right. Now, I wasn't emotionally available to her either, but I was more manipulative. I would take what I wanted emotionally from her by whining, sulking, threatening, guilting her. Not proud of any of it, but that's what I did. So I could not be emotionally available to her. And it's important that in marriage that we are emotionally available to each other. You see, because without being emotionally available to each other, you can't create an us. So what are some of the causes of being emotionally unavailable to others? Well, one, we talked about earlier, childhood issues or traumas. Trauma teaches the brain not to be vulnerable. Trauma teaches the brain not to open up. Trauma teaches the brain, stay safe, people are harmful. My brain learned through the abuse in my home, the craziness, and all the emotional put downs, particularly from my stepmother, that the world isn't safe, that you'll never measure up. So never let people actually in. Keep them at an emotional distance. The problem is I never really connected to myself emotionally either. I always say because of all of that in my childhood, and that wasn't just at home. I was a kid in school that was picked on. I was a kid in school that was made fun of. I was a kid that was picked last in recess for kickball. Got it? Nobody wanted me. And so I grew up lonely and disconnected. But what I also learned from the world was it's not a safe place, but you need love and acceptance connection. So by high school, I became a chameleon. I could hang out with the jocks. I could hang out with the smart people. I was in ROTC. I could hang out with the ROTC people. I could hang out with the regular people, and I could hang out with the potheads, if you will. The problem is, because I could hang out with all of them and fit into all of them, a chameleon, I never knew me. I never got to know the real me at the emotional level because I was always running from me. So one reason that people are emotionally unavailable is childhood traumas. Another was some people never learned to attach emotionally. A lot of kids in very broken homes never learned to emotionally attach. That's why you see all the crazy behavior they do, because that's the emotional brain trying to get those 10 core relational needs met in unhealthy ways. Another reason that some people find it difficult to emotionally be available is because they're actually struggling with an actual psychiatric diagnosis. It could be depression, addiction, anxiety disorder. There's some other mental health problem going on in their life that doesn't allow them to be emotionally present. Narcissism, those kind of things. And a fourth reason that people are emotionally unavailable is because that person, because the needs were not met, hurts and traumas, they have deep fears and insecurities that if they were to open up and be emotionally present and emotionally aware of what's going on in them and others, then if I did that, you'd reject me, you'd abandon me, which would only prove that I'm not good enough, that I don't matter, that I'm inadequate. All that's about self-worth. Because people have a lot of low self-worth, self-confidence, low self-esteem, there's these fears and insecurities about abandonment and rejection. They withhold from connecting and bonding to themselves and others. To be emotionally available to others, you're going to have to become emotionally available to oneself. What causes someone to be emotionally unavailable? But how would you recognize someone who's emotionally unavailable? We'll put some practical things together before we get out of here on our little live tonight. Now, how do you recognize someone who's emotionally unavailable? To be emotionally available to others, you got to be emotionally available to yourself. You got to have self-awareness. You got to be able to label your own emotions. You see, a lot of people lack that ability. It was about a year and a half ago, I read an article, and I wish I could remember where it is. I probably have to Google it to find it. But it was a national study that was done that pointed out that at the national level, 78% of Americans report that they're self-aware. Self-awareness is the first core competency of being emotionally intelligent, emotional wellness, I like to call it. Self-awareness is I can tell you exactly what I'm feeling in this moment, and I can label it. And I'm aware that I'm doing it, that I'm doing this, and I'm aware of what I'm feeling. That's fundamental. Because if you can't do that, you can't be available to somebody else. So you have to have self-awareness. But here's what's interesting about that article. Though 78% of people reported they are self-aware, it indicated in reality only 26% of Americans actually are self-aware. And I remember reading that to Luella, and I said to her, what this is really saying is most people aren't self-aware, that they're not self-aware. That's what it's really saying, which I found interesting. So how do you know if someone is not emotionally available? How do you recognize it? So here's some things. One, they're not going to make plans with you. You want to make plans and they don't want to make. They put it off. They have reasons or excuses on a regular basis not to. Why? Because that person's not there for you emotionally. You don't want to be around people that you don't have an emotional connection to. So you're trying to make plans with your partner, your spouse, and they keep coming with excuses. Well, I got to work late. I can't do that. Over time, you're like, do you want to spend time with me? Do you want to do anything? Well, I've got the emotion available to you. Because people who are connected emotionally find time. People who are not emotionally connected don't want to make the time. So the first one is they're not going to make plans with you. Secondly, they will choose what both of you will do. In other words, I'm not going to the beach, Luella, but we're going to go to the battlefield. I will choose. Why? Because I want that control. We're going to go where I want to go, but I'm not going to go where you want to go. Why? Because it doesn't matter to me what you feel and think, what you desire. So we're going to go where I want to go. So they choose what both of you will do. Number two, another way you know that a person's emotionally unavailable is you're the one that does the majority of the work on the relationship, not them. You're the one that's driving and changing and thinking and connecting and trying to confide and create the us. They may say they are, but their behavior indicates that they're disconnected. They're not present. And when you see someone, when you're doing the work on the relationship only and the other one's not, they're not emotionally there. Number four, people who are emotionally unavailable actually talk about me and I. They don't talk about we or us. Listen to people's language when they talk. People who are healthy and connected emotionally, it's we and us, and that's what it is because they believe in the us. There's the bond. People who are disconnected tend to use the word me or I on a regular basis. And when you're using the language of me or I, that tells you something, all right? Those who have followed me know that we believe the most important part of any marriage is the third part of the marriage. Third part wins, you both win. Third part lose, you both lose. You think, what's the third part? It's us. It's that sense of we-ness. And when us wins, you both win. Us lose, you both lose. People who are emotionally unattached don't want an us. They want to be them. You see, we always say this way, it takes two to make an us and one to kill it. One of the ways you know that a person is emotionally unavailable to you is they tend to talk about me or I, not we or us. All right, number five, over time, you find yourself getting more distant and disconnected from them. You don't find yourself getting emotionally close to them. I call that the sense of us. When you're not, over time, when you find yourself distancing, that person is emotionally unavailable to you. And lastly, the last way you can recognize where someone is emotionally unavailable to you, they don't keep their commitments and they invalidate the things that are important to you. In other words, we're supposed to go out to dinner with this, or we're supposed to go with the kids there, and all of a sudden they come up with an excuse not to go. Well, I work, or I've got to do this, or I got to fix that. They're always finding ways to not be with you, or they invalidate the things that are important to you. Why? They're not connected to you, and because of that, they don't want to be around you. These are the ways that you recognize someone who is emotionally unavailable to you. How would you know if you are emotionally unavailable? What are some things, Rick, that would tell me if I'm emotionally unavailable? Here we go. Number one, you stay away from commitments from your spouse. You find reasons to not be there. Secondly, you always keep your options open. I don't know what might you need to do. Yeah, so your commitment's like, yeah, I can do that unless, well, I can do that as long as, I'll be there unless. You always keep your options open so you have a way out. Number three, you would rather be an I than a we. There's a part of you that doesn't want to be we. Now, let me speak to this for just a minute. You could be in conflict and still desire to be a we. 2004, 2005 were the worst 2 years of my marriage. Luella and I had a lot to work through individually and relationally. But even though we were really disconnected, I mean, not a lot of us during that time, and as the righteous brother say, you lost that love and feeling. I always bring that song into my life, don't I? I love that song. I still wanted to be a we, but we had so much woundedness that kept it from being. We still desired it. I remember one time I was sitting on the bed. We emotionally were like far apart. I was sitting on the bed sulking one morning. She came sit next to me. She put her hand on my knee and she said, "I just want you to know something." I said, "What's that?" She goes, "I don't like you." And I said, "I know I'm not real likable." She said, "But I do love you, and we will work through this together." Oh man, those words took me for months because she still wanted to be a us too. If you'd rather be an I than a we, that's one way you know you're emotionally detached. Another one, number 4, is you find it difficult to be emotionally connected to most people. Did you get that? You find it difficult to be emotionally connected to a lot of people. Because a lot of times people are emotionally unavailable. This is about who they are as a pattern, as a way of being. This is about who they are. And lastly, another way you know that you're emotionally unavailable is when you find that trusting others. When you find that trusting others is difficult and scary, that's another way you know that you are emotionally disconnected from yourself. Thus, you're not emotionally available to others. Remember, the way we talk about it and relate well is us is the most important part of a marriage. Us wins, you both win. But to have a healthy, strong, mature, loving relationship, you've got to be a healthy, mature individual. That's maturity is about emotional development, you see. When I got married in 1984, emotionally, I was a child. Luella was not a mature adult, neither was I. And so we had to learn to grow up emotionally and work through the issues from our broken home and our own soul. We were wounded adults so that we can love maturely. And the way you love maturely is to be emotionally present to each other. But to be emotionally present to someone, I have to be emotionally present to myself. That's self-awareness so that I can be emotionally available to you and you to me.